Hello, everybody. How are you? Good. It's cloudy out, but everybody wake up. Rise and shine. Good evening, everyone. It's great to see you all here at the National Writers Union. Give it up for the National Writers Union. Local 1981 of UAW. Did I get the number right? 1981. Before I say anything else, I would like to wish a happy birthday on this day. In 1898, Paul Robeson was born. Happy birthday to Paul Robeson. A union man.
That's right.
A cultural warrior.
True.
You know, people get credit for, entertainers get credit for all kinds of nonsense, but he was as we all know, he was a cultural warrior. So thank you to National Writers Union for hosting us. You can look on Twitter at Pay the Writer. They get right to the point. Pay the Writer as National Writers Union. I am a member of the NWU, I'm proud to say. And they, as they say, they do get the writer paid. Ebony Magazine, Out Magazine are now paying freelancers. They had been stiffing for money for years. But thanks to the National Writers Union, they are now getting paid. If you're here, you obviously realize the importance of this moment, the importance of speaking out, the importance of bearing witness, as some of our speakers have done, having recently been to Venezuela, and they can tell us what is really happening there. As you know, if you read the newspapers or watch the news, we get the view of the United States government. And we get the view of the United States government, whether it's a Democrat or whether it's a Republican. And we know it's important at this juncture in history to take every opportunity to speak out against imperialism, to name it and to oppose it. We have a country where the press isn't free, where politics are not democratic, small d democratic. And we can see this in Venezuela, and we can see that in the coverage. We can see this in the statements that come from politicians. It's interesting, Democrats they always claim to be in resistance to the Trump administration, until something like this happens. Until a president declares an intention to unseat a government, and a government elected by its people, supported by its people, and even if it were not, a people who have a right to self-determination and a right to live free from violence. And even if there are no guns, we have to be careful of these people who say they're opposed to intervention, to military intervention. I don't know if you've noticed these people who talk about being opposed to military intervention, implying that they think it's all right to have sanctions, that it's all right for the United States government to create misery in that country. We've seen examples. The New York Times is notorious. You may have seen last week a woman who's a comedian, I believe. Her last name is Hausman, Joanna Hausman. And she had a little video criticizing people like us and calling Maduro a brutal dictator. They can't even come up with anything new, brutal dictator. And they did not disclose that her father, Ricardo Hausman, is a Guaido advisor, who is a banker, who is one of the people Well, you all know. I won't go on too much about her, but someone once said, if you don't read the newspaper, you are uninformed. But if you do read the newspaper, you are misinformed. And that's where we are now. So I'm going to start introducing our guests. We have, first of all, I'm just going to go down the line here. This is not necessarily the order we're going to go in. Raymond Nat Turner. Also, who, when I asked him how he wanted to be introduced, he said, he responded with the Q&A. How do you represent the National Writers Union, celebrate National Poetry Month and Jazz Appreciation Month, denounce U.S. imperialist aggression and hypocrisy, express solidarity with the working people of Venezuela and the world? And the answer is, he's the poet in residence of the Black Agenda Report, the town crier, Raymond Nat Turner, and an NWU board member? Yes? Co-chair. Okay. Now, give up. Now, William, unfortunately, I don't have a bio for you, but I think people know you're known, William Camacaro, who is Venezuelan, most importantly today, co-host of a program on WBAI. What's the name of your program?
La Voz Latina.
La Voz Latina. And he is joining us here. He's also recently been in Venezuela along with two of our other panelists. And next we have Sara Flounders, who's co-director of the International Action Center. She's on the Administrative Committee of the United National Anti-War Coalition, UNAC, and the No U.S. Bases Coalition, and many defense committees that are part of U.S. wars at home. She's a journalist with the Workers' World newspaper, traveled to many countries under U.S. siege, sanctions, and war, including Iraq, Syria, Sudan, and Yugoslavia, and was honored to participate in the delegation to Venezuela that was organized by the U.S. Peace Council. Next we have Danny Haiphong. Danny is an activist and journalist who has, for the last 5 years, been a weekly contributor to Black Agenda Report. His work has been featured in many places, recently in a book written by former Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney, her book, How the U.S. Creates Shithole Countries. And he's a co-author of, show your book, Danny. He just wrote a book, it just came out this week. Co-author of the recently released book, American Exceptionalism and American Innocence, A People's History of Fake News from the Revolutionary War to the War on Terror. And your reading is here.
Yes, I have a few books here, and I can talk to you more about how to get it as well.
And it's going to be here?
No. My book launch event will be at the People's Forum on Thursday. Ajamu Baraka will be there. Glenn Ford will be there. 320 West 37th Street, right around the block. This Thursday. April, what is that, 11th?
April 11th. And next we have Ajamu Baraka. Ajamu was the most recently vice presidential candidate for the Green Party. He's national organizer of Black Alliance for Peace. He's a contributor to Black Agenda Report as well. And he was co-chair of the delegation which recently came from Venezuela. And I'm realizing, did I introduce myself? No. I did not. Hello everybody, my name is Margaret Kimberley, and I'm an editor of Black Agenda Report, as well as a coordinating committee member of Black Alliance for Peace. Thank you all very much. So we're going to get started. Our first presenter is my neighbor also, I have to say, is Raymond Nat Turner. Raymond.
must put an end to the system of war. Stop the oil that it kills folks for. As long as there's greed, there can be no peace. Imperialist bloodshed simply must cease. Take to the streets and protest in the USA. Hey, hey, hey. Take to the streets and protest in the UK. Mm-hmm. Our war is here against hunger and greed and racist bloodshed on which fascists feed. If to battle for homes and health, soften up enemies to liberate our wealth. Hey, take to the streets and protest in the USA. Hey, hey, hey. Take to the streets and protest in the UK. Hey, hey, hey. Pay no attention to forked tongues in their polls. Listen to the voices that are deep in our souls. Hey, take to the streets and protest in the USA. Hey, hey, hey. Take to the streets and protest in the UK. Tell me what I say. Take to the streets and protest in the USA. Hey, hey, hey. Take to the streets and protest in the USA. All right, very good. If all options are on the table, let's hear filters usurping skull and crossbones. Water 400 times before flowing from a faucet in 50 states of Flint. If all options are on the table, let's hear boots on the ground and ladders meddling smoggy skies with windmills and solar panels. If all options are on the table, let's hear saws screaming propaganda and hammers chanting home, 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 homes, connecting 2x4s, overthrowing tents, sleeping bags, cardboard mattresses, metastasizing beneath bridges and on cold streets across the country. If all options are on the table, let's hear humanitarian intervention, stock market style chatter making free medical appointments for millions, toppling infant mortality, regime changing cancer, heart attacks, strokes. If all options are on the table, let's hear buckets of weaponized chicken, blockaded, supersized cannons of sugary water, sanctions, coup d'etat, overthrowing deadly colonels and kings, removing obese, malnourished Americans from harm's way. If all options are on the table, if all options are on the table, if all options are on the table, these are our appetizers. A thief, a thug, clown in a rug, a tweet, deceit, a lie, a cheat, embellish, embroider, a lying disorder, a myth, a fable, a bit unstable, flim flam, clap trap, bunkum, bull crap, an empty wagon, a puffed up dragon, a whopper, a fib, you peep from your crib, a sham, a fake, a major mistake, pathological lying, false flag flying, a grope, a trope, bad jokes, breast strokes, a grope of a crotch, another man notch, with a debauch, over water and scotch, a trumped up story, cock and bull glory, a foot in the mouth for strategy south, Pie in the sky, a barefaced lie, a pig in disguise, fooling some eyes, playing fast and loose with Jim Jones juice, a masquerade, a Nazi parade, a fake great nation, same plantation, a bug in the hall, a fly on the wall, a great big whale, an ongoing tale, a parade in July, another big lie, a wink of an eye, enough outcry. A thief, a thug, clown in a rug, a tweet, DC, a lie, a cheat. Time for feet in the street, sustaining street heat. Hey!
So I'm just going to follow up that wonderful performance by talking a little bit about the international struggle against fake news and what fake news is really all about. And I think it has a lot of relevance to the discussion we're going to have here today. So fake news, it's a creature of a desperate ruling class that no longer has any tolerance for the truth. Ever since Trump was used as the Pied Piper to aid Hillary Clinton's failed presidential campaign effort, the Democratic Party and its allies in the corporate media and U.S. intelligence have lamented the dangers of what they call fake news in an effort to rid the internet and rid the airwaves of any deviations from their official narrative. The story goes that Russia helped Trump win the White House by giving WikiLeaks incriminating DNC emails, which then harmed the Clinton campaign irreparably. And just as WikiLeaks and Russia have been criminalized by lies that implicate them in telling the truth, we writers and journalists on the left have been criminalized as quote-unquote dupes of Russia. The Mueller report's conclusion that the Trump-Russia story was a farce from the beginning cannot reverse the harm that has been done to journalism and activism by the fake news witch hunt. Left journalists and activists were first targeted by a shady online organization called Prop or Not, which was first covered by the CIA and Jeff Bezos' Washington Post shortly after the November 2016 election. This anonymous website labeled Black Agenda Report and other left websites as agents of the Kremlin. The U.S. intelligence apparatus then released report after report that blamed RT and other Russian media generally for creating divisions in the United States, mainly through their coverage of Occupy Wall Street and Black Lives Matter. So-called alt-right forces were equated with so-called alt-left forces, that being us, a euphemism, which is a euphemism for left of the Democratic Party. RT, Sputnik, and others were then forced to register as agents of a foreign government, and social media and silicone monopolies changed their algorithms to suppress our content at Black Agenda Report and others that challenged the many myths of American exceptionalism. The NATO-owned Atlantic Council, and neocon-sponsored NewsGuard Corporation also got in on the mix and are working to ensure that the war on fake news eventually reaches every single channel of electronic communication that exists today, including the software that we buy for our computers. Black Agenda Report has felt the consequences of the U.S. empire's so-called war on fake news. So have outlets that have expressed solidarity with Venezuela and other nations around the world, like Telesur and Venezuela Analysis. Each have repeatedly seen their Facebook and social media accounts removed or deleted. Over 2,000 social media accounts sympathetic to Venezuela's Bolivarian government were removed in February. Our struggle against fake news is thus international in scope and fundamentally different than the one being waged by our enemies in the ruling elite. This struggle must answer the calls to action being sounded by the most urgent questions of this period, Venezuela being one of them. The U.S. establishment has identified the struggle to defend self-determination of peoples around the world as the most dangerous question of all. Venezuela has been subject to ruthless bipartisan lies that Margaret touched on a bit to vilify the Bolivarian government. Washington and its corporate media servants have portrayed the Venezuelan people as starved subjects of a ruthless third world dictator who wields absolute power over them. We, of course, have heard this before. When Republican Senator Marco Rubio posted on Twitter an image of the maimed corpse of Libya's leader Muammar Gaddafi, former leader Muammar Gaddafi, He revealed the main objective for the U.S. in Venezuela, to overthrow its democratically elected government, just like it did in Libya, just like it did in Iraq, and just like it did in Afghanistan and other nations all around the world in the last few decades alone. When we discuss Venezuela, our first call to action is to unearth the lies of the U.S. empire that further wars abroad against our natural allies. Thanks to the Black Alliance for Peace, the U.S. Peace Council, and journalistic outlets such as the Gray Zone Project, many of the current lies being spewed and disseminated about Venezuela have been debunked through direct acts of solidarity with the people of Venezuela. We must now deal with the source of the lies, which is the declining U.S. empire. My co-authored book, which we talked about earlier, The American Exceptionalism and American Innocence, A People's History of Fake News from the Revolutionary War to the War on Terror, attempts to do this in written word. Roberto Servent and I posit that the ideology of American exceptionalism, or the notion that the U.S. is a force for good in the world, has rendered the American empire innocent, or even non-existent in the eyes of many who identify as American. This has been a centuries-long process characterized by class warfare and struggle between the oligarchs in control of the United States and the poor and oppressed who are terrorized by the American imperial project. The ideology of American exceptionalism subsumes and erases this struggle under the banner of a chosen, quote-unquote, civilized, i.e. white, and bipartisan national project, which has no shame in its complete rewrite of history. American exceptionalism has us believe not only that Venezuela is a corrupt dictatorship in need of U.S. imperial medicine, but also that the U.S. saved the world in World War II, rather than killed hundreds of thousands in Dresden alone and lay nuclear waste to 2 Japanese cities as acts of intimidation against the Soviet Union. It has us believe that dozens of nations that the U.S. has overthrown since the end of World War II have been better off for it. In the book, we compare the atrocious human rights record of Saudi Arabia with the stellar record of Cuba to demonstrate that the U.S. is truly exceptional in propping up terrorist regimes and waging war against those who dare to organize their societies based upon the needs of people rather than the thirst for profit. Venezuela can be included on that list. The United States' racist and capitalist empire is desperately trying to preserve American exceptionalism as a disciplinary ideology. In 2016 and into today, Donald Trump barks that he wants to make America great again, while the Democratic Party elites, such as Hillary Clinton and the rest of them, shriek, America is already great. Both parties have praised the $30 million plus spent per hour on the U.S. military as an example of the quote-unquote humanitarian presence that the U.S. possesses around the world. The millions of Black American lives that have been destroyed by mass incarceration, or the half of the United States living on $30,000 per year or less, are mere afterthoughts. These deplorable conditions remind us that the U.S. was built on the most ruthless forms of hypocrisy. We need to continue to write about this hypocrisy and fight it head on. Our duty to the people of Venezuela, and indeed the people of the world, is being restrained by the pervasiveness of fake news in the form of American exceptionalism. Luckily, the resolve and the resistance of the Venezuelan people serves as a guide for us as we continue to develop our capacity to take down the empire from within its own headquarters. And I think people on the panel here are going to talk a little bit about their trip and what they saw. So I'm finished. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to say thanks to the National Crier and Writer. Also, I want to thank to Roswell and Sheila because I was in Venezuela for over 2 months and a half, and they have been inviting me to these meetings in January. So I feel obligated to be here. So it's wonderful to be back and to be here with all of you. So I went to Venezuela for the inauguration of President Maduro. So it was a very interesting event. Several presidents from South America, Evo Morales was there, and several key people internationally talking were in Venezuela for the inauguration. There was a big mobilization of the people on the street. And also several people from the United States were over there visiting and wanted to accompany the Venezuelan process. So I was supposed to stay only 15 days, and I was postponing my time, and I was, moving my day, and because things were happening. The first thing was the January 23, when Guaidó, he proclaimed himself Venezuelan president, with the entire support of the United States. And in those days, there was a lot of, how to explain, people were very worried in the street because people were waiting for consequence from the United States. So it was very hard to see some people walking in the street at night, even in those areas that middle-class people hanging out in the Caracas area, so that usually are full of people. So even in those areas, it was very difficult to see Venezuelan people running off in restaurants or buying in shopping malls. So basically, everybody was waiting for something. But nothing happened. So everything continued. Then we have 2 more days, so they have several more days. And I decided to stay for every day to see if something happened. But luckily, people maintained calm, very organized. People were in the street all the time supporting the government. Big mobilization all the time. And basically, in a moment I decided to move from Caracas because it's too much mobilization, too much politics. Let me go out, and I went to the beach. So I was on the beach for 3 days, and suddenly I had a big number of calls saying what's up and all kinds of text messages. And I said, well, something happening. So I started to listen to all the messages, and it was a bunch of messages from people from the United States and telling me, William, be careful, take care. And I was saying, so what the hell is going on? I sent an email for some of the people that really were calling me constantly. I said, hey, nothing is happening here. Everything is happening out there in the United States. It's the main 3 media that have created all this hysteria around Venezuela.
Right.
But everything here is fine. So and I sent them a picture of me eating a beach fish. So, the hysteria, it was incredible. So, I stayed several days, and that was in Falcón. I really didn't see, anything extraordinary. Yes, people are having trouble with food issues. People are having, we have a economic crisis, but we are not in war. That is the project of the United States, taking us to a war, taking us to a humanitarian crisis. And they have been working in that project for over 10 years already. And the first one to really push for that was President Obama with his decree declaring Venezuela an unusual and extraordinary threat. In those days, also I had the opportunity to see a bunch of Venezuelans that were coming back from Colombia. And the story that they were telling me were really pathetic. It were horror. Basically, a couple, they lost their child. They found his body days after he was kidnapped without organs. There was another family that they lost someone from a member of their family, and they don't know what happened to him. So it's incredible the amount of horrible stories of people that went, lived to Colombia, thinking that in Colombia the situation was much better. In fact, next to my mother's house, an entire family, they moved to Colombia, and now they're back from Colombia. And with all these incredible stories about what's really happening over there, about how people disappearing in Colombia, and how Venezuelan people are treated in Colombia, because that's another problem that Venezuelan people are facing, the revolution is facing, is that a big number of people from Venezuela decide to leave the country, and they are under attack almost in every country. When they see someone from Venezuela, they immediately think that they support the Bolivarian revolution, and for that reason they should be attacked. So it's a xenophobia against the Venezuelan all over South America, and it's something that really worries me. So I went back to Caracas several times because a bunch of people were coming constantly from the United States and Europe all the time are traveling to Venezuela. This is an advice for everybody. I think that everybody should go to Venezuela. This is the moment to be there because this is the moment to see by yourself what really is going on over there. So you can see really. I remember that I think that was in February. More than 300 people went to Venezuela for a social forum there. It was a big event from all over Europe, United States, Canada. So in Caracas, I had the opportunity to meet with a big number of people that were traveling to Venezuela for those forums that take place almost every month in Caracas. And everybody was, as I said, surprised. Life is normal here. Nothing strange is going on. People go to the work, people go to do the daily common things. The only something that was completely disrupting was the blackout. I was during the first blackout in a community called La Candelaria. And for me, there was a moment of panic because there is no electricity, there is no water, no cell communication, no cellular communication, no way to communicate with anyone through cell phone. There is no possibility to buy anything using your debit card, your credit card, because the ATMs are not working. The banks are closed. If you don't have cash, you're screwed. So in that day, I really was a little nervous, and I was with several friends in La Candelaria, and the next day everything was normal, but we didn't have light, electricity, until maybe, I think that was more than 15 hours. In the second blackout, I was in El Valle. This is a community. I don't know if any of you watch the images of Guaidó visiting this community in Caracas, and he was completely rejected by the entire community. People went to the street. He had basically the police had to protect him from the community. So I was in that community during the blackout, and really for the second time, and the second time was I had the feeling of terror because everybody was sitting around and everybody was thinking maybe we are under attack and we don't know. Maybe something serious happening and we don't know anything. So, and we really were completely scared and terror and talking among us, but we didn't have anything really to do. What we can do in that condition. We didn't have the possibility to call anyone. So, and that happened several times. The blackout was continuous, happened several times, and was it really was every time was something that provoked a lot of terror to most of the people in the country. But the good thing is that most of the people stay calm. They wait to get something resolved, to see if the government have any communication with the nation, and there was no panic. They were waiting to have everybody in panic and have people fighting on the street each other. That's what they were expecting with the electricity blackout. But not only that, the other second thing that they were waiting is to damage all the S-300 missiles that Venezuela had from Russia. They wanted to destroy the, I don't know how to call like the GPS, I don't know, the equipment that the brain of those missiles. So that's why Russia decided to send a little more than 100 soldiers to Venezuela, are specialists in this kind of equipment, to check them and to see that everything is fine, everything is working fine. That was the most, I would say, the most difficult time, and during those 2 months and a half, to see the panic and the people, to see the awareness of everybody, expecting that, we are on the attack, we cannot do anything. But in the rest of the tree, everything was normal. I didn't see anything rare. And yes, people are arriving from other countries to Venezuela with all kinds of stories about what happened to them, not only in Colombia, but also in Peru. There's a big number of Venezuelans in Peru too. And I really believe that the next coming days are very critical, especially for the next Guaido Day, is April 21, 22. So today, the Permanent Council and the OAS accept the ambassador that was appointed by Guaido in the Organization of the American States. So they vote to be able to pass that resolution. They needed 24 votes, but they don't care. They got 18 votes. That was enough for them to have this guy as ambassador of Venezuela in the OAS. So that happened today. Tomorrow, we will have also on the Security Council in the UN, Pence talking about Venezuela and about the role that Russia and China are developing right now in Venezuela. And they are very worried because Venezuela, Russia and China are attacking the Venezuelan democracy. So that will take place tomorrow. And there are clear indications that most of the money that has been frozen from Venezuela in the international bank system is now used by Guaido and his team to arm a paramilitary group in Colombia with the money from the Venezuelan government.
Yes.
So, and to also continue this economic warfare against the Venezuelan people. I think that it's very important for us to denounce that, to denounce the economic warfare, to denounce that Venezuela is facing a coup d'etat. It's a war and terrorism organized from the United States against the Venezuelan people. Thank you very much.
Thank you, William. And let me start by thanking the National Writers Union and especially Sheila Hamanaka and Russell Dale for organizing tonight's program. I want to start by talking about the impact of war propaganda. You know, the media lies, when they are repeated again and again and again, so relentlessly, that even for those who reject it and oppose U.S. wars and know the role of the corporate media, the war propaganda seeps into our thinking and our terminology. And it's a real problem with fake news, particularly when it's a complete fabrication. It's like a different reality. You're talking to someone about a different planet. It's very hard. It's meant to create a reality that when you're talking to someone, it's hard to get past the images that are in their head, that have been put there by the media. Now, what we saw in Venezuela is really clear that it's still an unfolding process, a revolutionary process. But we're faced with years of media characterization that Venezuela is corrupt, inept, mismanaged. There are horrible shortages, enormously dangerous, as William was saying, and empty shelves, and it's so repressive, and the violence, and the empty hospitals, and so on and so forth. That is the propaganda. It's nonstop. And it's overlaid also with just layers of demonization against the elected leadership of Chavez and now Maduro. They're always referred to, every single article, as dictators. It's just coded also in layers of ingrained racism and Western arrogance. That is true. You can't read an article without just feeling the stench of that level of racism. Imagine an Afro-Venezuelan bus driver as president of Venezuela. U.S. can't abide that. And the wealthy in Venezuela can't abide it. Now, what we saw was a political process underway of really popular participatory democracy that has the population so enthusiastically engaged. I mean, we went to huge demonstrations. I'm talking tens and tens of thousands, just covering the avenues, and it's a regular weekly occurrence. And people come out as unions, as schools, as neighborhoods. It's happening all the time, all over the country. And it's really part of the class struggle. It's a political struggle for consciousness. We learned a lot about the elected community councils. Every group of 200 families, they can register with the government, form their own councils in neighborhoods, and all the food and essential supplies are distributed through those community councils. It's a real way of concretely cutting down on corruption. All the decisions and the cleanups and also the militia units are organized through these elected councils. And then in turn, 10 to 12 of these elected community councils form a commune. Now, the communes are a very interesting part of this whole process. The elected leadership of a commune includes the community councils. It also includes leadership from the women's organizations, LGBTQ organizations, seniors, and the militia units. And it's these communes that in turn elect the Constituent Assembly. So you can see why the U.S., just from the start, hates the Constituent Assembly. There's sort of two elected bodies. One is the National Assembly, where the old forces and the opposition hold power, and then there's the Constituent Assembly, which is this new force. We learned a lot about the more than 2 million strong People's Popular Militias that are based in every neighborhood. They're armed, they're trained, they operate with the Venezuelan military, but they're locally based. They're volunteer units. And they really have an impact also on the army itself. And this is why the Venezuelan military didn't break. A lot of it is that force behind them of a militia that's larger than the U.S. Army. Consider that. So, just in talking about people's power and what U.S. imperialism faces, the U.S. war machine, it never rests. It's always scheming and planning. Every country in the world is in its crosshairs, not just Venezuela. Every gain in sovereignty is a threat to the corporate global domination. Capitalism, quite frankly, this is something we all know here, needs division. It needs ruthless competition. It needs people hating and fighting each other. Now, Venezuela has accomplished so much just to alleviate poverty, to advance education, to build health care for millions of people who were just ignored in past U.S. regimes. I mean, we visited one community, Katia. This is an area of 1.5 million people. We're talking about the population of Brooklyn. Was not even on the maps. It's a part of Caracas. Was not even on the maps previous to the Bolivarian Revolution. Because if it was on the maps, it meant they had to provide like water and plumbing and electricity and whatnot. It was completely a favela, a shantytown, but unrecognized. People there were not even counted, let alone, of course, registered to vote or participate in any way at all. It's entirely a different process today. And that entire section and all the parts of Venezuela is overwhelmingly an urban population, 90% urban. The U.S. is 80% urban. So this is an urban population, largely living in cities, and those cities have been transformed. If you build housing for 2.5 million families, that's about a third of the population that now has new housing. And the new housing isn't just housing. It comes with cafes and bakeries and daycare centers and schools and playgrounds and a lot of other things that make it a neighborhood that has a community council and a militia to defend it. So this is taken very seriously. And it's a huge gain. It's a huge gain. But we can't forget, what is it that Wall Street sees when they look at Venezuela? They see the largest oil and gold reserves in the world. That's how they see it. They do not see the people. They see the natural gas and diamonds, iron, along with all that oil. Now, just personally looking at it, because I've been active more than 50 years in movements for revolutionary change, and I've been in other countries in the midst of the terror that's created by U.S. bombs, and seen the impact of strangulating sanctions when there just is not enough of anything, especially medicine. And it's a form of war that creates deadly artificial shortages of the most essential supplies. I mean, if you can think about back to Iraq, Lebanon, Gaza today, horrendous conditions, Syria, Yugoslavia during the U.S. bombing and the massive destruction, when they destroyed 14 tanks and 438 schools. That's the way the U.S. carries out a war. In every one of those places, there was organized human resistance. But Venezuela is experimenting with very radical solutions to very real problems. There's hyper wild 3,000% inflation. That's part of economic destabilization. What's the response? Free subways, free gas for the cars, free metros, free buses, free utilities. Just don't charge for it anymore. I mean, it's irrelevant in the currency, but those kind of solutions really have an enormous impact on the whole population. The other thing that's happening is that in Venezuela, all of the people's organizations are studying past U.S. war scripts. They will be able to tell you more about Chile or Iraq or Syria. I mean, they're looking at it on what to expect, and they're learning and applying tactics that helped many other countries to resist. So we return from this trip, I want to say, deeply optimistic about Venezuela's future, their ability to resist. At every step, almost everyone we met, there were certain slogans that kind of resonate about collective versus individual solutions. That's the only way they're going to be able to survive, is finding the collective solutions. One thing that was very exciting there is you really feel the importance there of demonstrations that happen here. We had an almost 2-hour meeting with President Maduro. This was really a highlight of the trip. And he discussed the attack on the electric grid, the impact of the sanctions, all the forms of popular resistance. But the one thing that really stuck is he said the struggle in Latin America has always, 200 years, been between Monroe and Bolivar. Monroe and Bolivar, 200 years, between U.S. domination and national sovereignty. He said now Trump has actually described it. It's a global struggle between capitalism and socialism. I said, that's true too. And he laughed because even as we were meeting on his phone, he was receiving tweets, insulting tweets, from Rubio and Abrams. Isn't that incredible? I mean, it's really crude, petty, schoolyard bullying insults. It's an intended form of psychological warfare. Now, he didn't respond to these bullying threats. But as soon as someone in the delegation said, today as we're meeting, there's a demonstration taking place in Minneapolis of no war in Venezuela, that's what he tweeted back right away. See, it meant so much. And I want to say for everyone who was at Wall Street on February 23rd, when there's a struggle going on at every border crossing in Venezuela, massive demonstrations, confrontations. But there was a demonstration on Wall Street, and President Maduro sent us a tweet saying, thank you, this is so important. There were demonstrations on that day in 153 cities around the world on February 23rd, because it was the whole world standing up with Venezuela. At a very crisis moment, would the military break? Would the people break? Would there be resistance or not? And that was a crucial day. So it's things like that. We shouldn't forget how important a movement is, how important a meeting here is, an action is, a picket line is. I want to just say a couple words. I don't want to rule my time here. On the targeting of the electric grid. William described so much of this. We arrived as this attack was taking place. Actually spent an extra many hours in Panama City because the planes couldn't land except in daylight because there were no landing lights at night. So you can imagine, and for half the delegation, people came late, some delegations couldn't come at all. We returned days late. The arrival in Caracas, the city was still dark without traffic lights. The hotel was almost dark. It really means no pumps are working. That means no water. That means no water. It means no elevators. No water for cooking, drinking, flushing toilets. This really is an enormous problem. But mainly, as William was saying, it means no communication. You don't know what's happening. And the idea behind this was, could they create massive destabilization? And there was cynical laughter about it. Do you remember? Here's a former CIA director, never forget who he is, now Secretary of State, Pompeo, who tweets, no food, no medicine, now no power, next, no Maduro. That's not what happened. See, that's not what happened. Total darkness of the power grid, and it didn't lead to mass rebellions or widespread looting or any of those things, which actually are a real response here in the U.S. among youth who know that everything has been stolen from them, including their future. And will, of course, won't there be an opportunity to seize an advantage for just 1 minute, for just one night? But that's not what happened in Venezuela, because people feel it's their collective property. So there was every effort to set up water distribution centers, all kinds of communication centers. 5 to 7 days of this. There were lines for water and emergency supplies. Schools and workplaces had to close. There was no working metro. But it didn't galvanize public unrest. The same thing with the phony humanitarian distribution of food. As I go on, let me just ask, was there anyone here who was on Wall Street on February 23rd? Yeah, see, most of us were. Because I think we all knew, we felt, this is a moment. This is a moment. And that was the feeling in Venezuela among millions of people. Now, let me close in talking about what's this new U.S. form of war. They call it hybrid war. And it's when the State Department and the CIA and the White House, they coordinate simultaneous attacks that are economic, legal, financial, diplomatic. It's media attacks. It's psychological attacks, it's subversion, and it's cyber kinetic attacks. And they're all attacks to destabilize the government and demoralize the movement and tear apart the armed forces. For the CIA, it's a new art form. And it really means using also hunger, artificial enforced sanctions. Really, let's talk about what are sanctions. Because we have to make it as hated as if someone said napalm. Because sanctions are a bomb that goes off in every hospital, in every market, in every school. It really is destruction. In Venezuela, because with the oil money, they were able to buy medicine for the entire population. They trained thousands, more than 6,000 community doctors graduated just this past year. Medical clinics. But essential medicines have been cut by 80%. That means insulin and cancer drugs and functioning x-ray machines. The most basic cardiovascular medicines, all kinds of essential medicines are now 20% of what they were. So you can have doctors in clinics, but if it's empty, that's a big problem. That's a big problem. Now, it's being met in really interesting ways. There was, just in the last few weeks, more than 600 tons of essential medical supplies that were just delivered by China and Russia and Iran, Turkey, India, countries all over the world that have faced sanctions and the threat of sanctions that just are not willing to let Venezuela just go down. And even though every form of funding has been cut, they can't use a credit card. They can't use their own gold. They can't use their own oil to pay for any of those supplies. And there's a lot of work in finding workarounds on all of this. So it's a very important part of the process. International solidarity, though, is what is also helping, because without that, without the supplies, it would be very difficult to survive. Without also some of the military equipment that's coming, these anti-aircraft batteries that William was describing, and the technology to maintain them. So we shouldn't forget how important our political solidarity is here, but also how important the material solidarity a number of countries really are providing. Let me close by saying in the days ahead, we really have to think about how to make sanctions as a weapon of mass destruction, as a war crime, as a violation of the UN Charter, of all international law. We really have to begin to talk about this. The idea that you can just shut off water, basic supplies, even chlorine to purify water, every single needed thing. Now, they're finding new and creative ways. You know, there's a Ministry of Urban Agriculture that's been set up. I love this. I'm a gardener. I just love the Ministry of Urban Agriculture, because they are setting up community gardens on every backyard, vacant lot, rooftop, in every city. It's quite an elaborate plan, and it's already providing more than 25% of the food needs. It's vegetables, fresh fruit. It's 100% organic, because they can't even import the pesticides and the fertilizers and the seeds that they did previously. It's also raising rabbits and chickens and all kinds of, we visited some of these community gardens. It was quite incredible. And their technicians, they said, well, this takes a lot of science. It takes really specialized technicians. So our technicians are from Cuba, which was able to survive the difficult, the special period, Vietnam, and People's Korea. Those are the three countries that are giving them the specialized assistance. So, those are countries that might not have the materials to give that China or Russia would have, but they have the experience in mobilizing the people and organizing agriculture in a way that everyone, every community, every neighborhood, almost every block then becomes self-sustaining. It's a very important part of even people feeling confident in their ability to resist. So let me end it on that. I also want to say for everyone who was on Wall Street on February 23rd, we are going back to Wall Street on May Day. So join us on Wall Street. There's a planning meeting at our office tomorrow night. Everyone here is involved. We're really going to rock that street and say no to the walls and no to Wall Street. So the planning meeting is tomorrow. Let's build solidarity, people's solidarity here. Let's support every form of solidarity with Venezuela around the world. Hands off.
All power to the people. All power to the people.
All power to the people.
That, my friends, is the call to action. That is the reason why we're here this evening. That was the reason why we organized the delegation to Venezuela. We understood that what we have in Venezuela is a process, an effort to build real, authentic, democratic power of the people. So, my friends, we have a task before us. We want to talk about what we saw in Venezuela, but we also want to talk about what we need to do here in this space to build alternative power that can put a brake on U.S. intervention, a brake on U.S. imperialism. Now, we have seen the plan unfold. 2015, Barack Obama declared that Venezuela was an unusual and extraordinary threat to the national security of the U.S. Now, we saw the consequence of that. That basically, as a consequence of that declaration, there was an intensification of the efforts to undermine that nation state. That process intensified in 2010 when they artificially devalued the currency. It continued when they persuaded the Saudis to increase oil production. That had the effect of reducing income for not only Venezuela but also Russia and Iran. We have talked about already this evening the sanctions, the criminal sanctions imposed on the country, the siege of the economy imposed on the country, not only by the U.S., but their partners in crime also got into it, their friends there in Western Europe. What we refer to from the Black Alliance for Peace as the axis of domination. The U.S., EU, and NATO. So this was the context that we experienced when we got to the country. As Sara described, we came right in the middle of the cyber attack. We saw the consequence of that attack. But you know what we also saw? We saw a spirit of resistance. We saw people who were and are committed to protecting the integrity of their process. We saw people who were not going to allow themselves to be broken by this criminal attempt to undermine their process and to disrupt their historical process. So we saw the results of criminality, but we also saw the spirit of revolutionary resistance. And that's very, very important. It's very important for us to not only see that, but to come back here and to talk about that. And try to encourage people in this country of their responsibility as citizens of empire. That innocence is to be immoral. You cannot allow yourself to not know what is happening by this state around the world in your name and my name. That is a position that not only has a detrimental impact on people globally, but is having an impact on our ability here to build effective resistance.
That's right.
So we have to talk about this experience, but we also have to put it in context. Now, the question became, when we talked about the U.S. or the Obama administration declaring that Venezuela was a extraordinary threat, and we all laugh because it's like laughable. But if you think about it, it's understandable. What did Venezuela do to the U.S. to have that position, to have that celebrated position? All they attempted to do was to provide an alternative model of development, an alternative model of democracy, an alternative model of social organization, and to assist other peoples and nations in the Caribbean and Latin America to develop an alternative model. And because of that crime, they became a threat to U.S. interests, because the U.S. interest is to keep people in subjection. It is to try to convince the people that there is no alternative to this madness. That what we see in the U.S. and Europe is the apex of human development, and that we cannot imagine anything beyond this. So any attempt to try to refute that madness is undermined. It's an attempt to destroy it. And that's what they have been doing with Venezuela. They put the economy under siege. They steal the resources. They launch cyber attacks. And then they say to people around the world, look, this is socialism in Venezuela. I mean, there's something psychotic about that. And psychotic in the sense, too, that people are not even making the connections. They hear about the fact that there are sanctions. They have seen that the U.S. is involved in undermining the economy. They have heard stories about the fact that they have blocked food supplies and medicine. But then when Trump and his Democratic supporters say that what we see in Venezuela is a natural consequence of socialism, they're not making the connections. But we have to make those connections. We've got to wake people up. We've got to move people back to a place of rationality. Because right now, irrationality is ruling here in this space, in this society. So our responsibility is to put this in context. The concern with Venezuela is a concern with undermining the progressive advancement of the people. It is about undermining Bolivia. It is about undermining Nicaragua. It's about retargeting Cuba. It's about targeting any attempt on this planet to try to build something different from what we see today. So we've got to understand that we are, in fact, in a war, that war extends beyond Venezuela, that war is unfolding here in this country. And we are, in fact, making those connections. We say that the militarism and aggression we see in Venezuela, in Africa, in Asia, is just the flip side of the war being waged here in this country. The domestic army that we refer to as the police that engage in criminal activities that murder people with impunity, the mass incarceration, the preparations for popular resistance that these domestic army units are engaged in by allowing themselves to be trained by the apartheid state of Israel. All of these things are connected and reflect the war that we are in fact involved in. So again, our responsibility is to in fact tell the story. One way in which we can begin to bring people to a place where we don't allow what the U.S. state is involved in to escape public scrutiny and popular discourse, is that in this upcoming electoral arena, this 2020 election that's coming next year, we have got to make this issue of war and militarism a central component of the national discourse.
Yes.
Now, there's certain things that we can do, and I'm going to end on this so we can get into Q&As and talk about more details, what we saw and what we need to do. But I think in terms of us making sure that we begin to bring people back to a place where there's a sense of morality, where we make sure that someone that defines themselves as progressive cannot escape taking a definitive position on the issue of war and militarism. We've got to do a few things. We should say that any individual who is attempting to be a candidate, or any individual who is now an elected representative, we must demand that they support efforts to cut the military budget by 50% as it started.
Thank you.
And to reallocate those funds to fund social programs in the areas of housing, education, healthcare, green jobs, public transportation, etc. They must commit to passing resolutions at every level of government to bring U.S. in alignment with international law and the United States and the United Nations Charter, and oppose all arbitrary and illegal U.S. military, economic, and political interventions into the internal affairs of sovereign nations, regardless of political party controlling the office of the presidency. They must promote the closing of the over 800 U.S. foreign military bases and ending of U.S. participation in the white supremacist NATO military structure. They must call for and work to close the U.S. Africa Command and withdraw all U.S. military personnel from Africa. They must commit to ending the militarization of police forces through the Department of Defense 1033 program that transfers millions of dollars worth of military equipment to local police forces. They must demand that the Department of Justice document and investigate all instances of use of lethal force against non-white populations as demanded by various human rights treaty monitoring bodies. And they must advocate that the U.S. adhere to the United Nations resolution of July 2017 to eliminate all nuclear weapons globally. This is how we begin to move toward providing real concrete solidarity to the masses of people who are engaged in revolutionary processes across this world. We've got to make sure that the state and its activities is blocked by the people. We've got to, in fact, build popular power. We've got to move from the slogan of power to the people to a reality. So, my friends, that's our task. That's our responsibility when it comes to Venezuela, when it comes to Haiti, when it comes to the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Our responsibility is to oppose and to fight U.S. imperialism until it's defeated. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much to our panel. We do want to, of course, have an opportunity for questions and answers. And so I think we only have the two, which mic? It's not on. I don't know if one is better. So we could pass, what I would like to do is pass around the microphone. We don't have a mic stand, so we're going to have to pass it. I would ask that your question or comment, whatever you have to say or ask, you can say in 60 seconds, I believe. So try to think of it now and make it short and sweet. Oh, great, thank you. Yes, so anyway, so who would like this? And we're going to not necessarily go in order of who raised their hand first. There are all sorts of considerations. Who has a question, comment? So far, just two people. Well, that's simple. So far, oh, one here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
So,
Yeah, 1 and 2 behind you. And 3.
Having been lucky enough to be in Venezuela on a trip that William organized about 7 years ago, I got a chance to see firsthand the degree of support for Chavez. And I think everybody should be clear, it wasn't 80, 20%. It's always been 60, 65%. There was some very close elections, etc. And honestly, I'm a bit surprised that the Venezuelan people have withstood the tremendous attacks that have been going on. The question I have is, how would you chart the degree of support for guano? And I call them guano. How has that changed? Because when the attack first started, you know, all over the media is these giant demonstrations that it looks like they're there for guano, and it seems that that's diminished. What's your sense of the degree of support for guano?
Should we take a few questions or answer?
All right, we'll do that. So 1, 2, and 3 will state their questions first.
Congressman Tulsi Gabbard seems to be hitting a lot of the issues we've been discussing. What is your opinion on her, and do you think that she is moving in the direction that you guys approve of?
And the third person here, and then our panelists will answer.
This one is directed at the brother, I can't remember your name, that just spoke. Ajamu. What is the relationship of this process that the imperialists are engaged in with one place, Venezuela, as connected to Cuba? And how can black and brown people, especially here, be woke up about that when we sometimes don't seem to see the connections? And for Sara, with the presidential candidates that are on board right now that we see in the traditional political arena, is there anyone, or what would you like to have us challenge them about so that they will address militarism? Thank you.
Okay, so, yes.
Okay, one Guaido.
Oh, sorry.
So, I'm sorry. Juan Guaido. No? So people call him on the street white dog. It's a white dog. That's how people call him in the street in Venezuela. And in reality, he is not popular at all. They have been doing certain things that are completely wrong. For example, just a few weeks ago, he announced that he was pushing through with his partners in the United States to have some sanctions against credit cards, Visa, MasterCards, so no one could use any credit card in Venezuela. So of course, all the middle class and high class start to yell, and they start to screaming because they have credit cards. So a bunch of people from the middle class were very angry with him. It's very interesting because some of the measures that he's taking, that he's basically asking and requesting to the State Department, are also attacking his own class in Venezuela. And people are able to see it. So it's very unpopular. The last demo that he organized was a few days ago, and we said that was very small, was not what they were expecting. Although the picture that Pompeo sent to tweet and also Bolton, it's a very It's a picture very focused on the stage. You don't see what's going on around. So it was very small. And to be honest, I think that he will be put sometimes when he will be in jail.
In response to your question, I think it's important for us to remind people of that North America is part of the Americas. And so we've been promoting this notion of the absolute necessity to create an American-wide consciousness. That those of us who are in North America, we cannot allow ourselves to, we can't define ourselves as progressives, as radicals, as revolutionaries, and continue to be disconnected from the rest of the Americas. So for African people, for black people, we also have to remind people that there are 150 million Africans in the Americas. And so, when we see a situation like Venezuela, and we see the mobilization by the Trump administration with their Democrat Party allies to engage in criminal activity, to dust off the playbook from Nicaragua and begin to organize what will be cross-border incursions by a contra force that they are now in the process of training and equipping in Colombia. We've got to help people to understand that they are, in fact, facilitating a process of political genocide against people who look like them. That Sara mentioned that we went to Katia in West Caracas, and we had a chance to meet with some of the community leaders, 1.5 million people. These are primarily black and brown folks who are the base of the Bolivarian process, the base of the support of their government. And we met with 2 or 3 black women who are the leaders of that community. So this war that's being waged by the axis of domination, it clearly has a racial component. That this attempt on the part of Western Europe and the U.S. Is an attempt to try to maintain their dying hegemony. It is to try to maintain the capitalist colonial structure they put in place that emerged coming out of 1492 that now is on a decline. And they have concluded that they're going to use any means necessary, primarily violence and militarism, to maintain their global hegemony. So that element has to be part of the understanding and part of the discourse. When it comes to Tulsi Gabbard, Hawaii, of course. I think that her voice is important. You see, I'm not looking for, I don't need religion. So I'm not looking for the perfect candidates. When people are raising certain kinds of questions that need to be debated in the public domain, I think we need to raise those people up. So the very fact that she is questioning the regime change strategy of the state, the fact that she is standing in opposition to continue war and militarism, I think these are positions that need to be part of the national discourse. So I encourage her to continue to do that and to mark out a place, I don't know if it's left, right, or whatever, but to mark out that space to raise those critical questions.
Can you just address Cuba in one sentence?
Cuba is in the crosshairs. They've already said it, basically, that as they are now intensifying the efforts to undermine Venezuela, they're going to be shifting more attention toward Cuba. And for us, Cuba is key, not only for the Americas, but for the world. And so we are attempting to make those connections so people can understand that our task is not only Venezuela, in supporting Venezuela, supporting the uprising in Haiti, but also supporting Cuba, and also supporting Nicaragua. That the efforts on the part of the U.S. state is to completely reverse the progress made over the last 2 decades. And they're very intentional about that. Our responsibility is to understand what's at stake and to engage in a counter-resistance.
Okay. Should I answer this one on the election?
I wanted to answer on the election too,
Sure.
if possible.
Just on the elections, I'm very much for people raising real struggles in the right here and now, and having a realistic expectation of both political parties and what presidential elections are all about in the U.S., which is not having any voice for the people. That doesn't mean you can't use a platform as a way of raising demands, but just in terms of having a realistic explanation. Let me explain just about one bill in Congress that was a bill for about 16, maybe 20 years, that John Conyers always raised, 676, Medicare for all, full health care, right? And that was introduced every year, and it never got out of committee. Bill 676 never got out of committee. Finally, I think 120 Congress people signed on, majority of the Democrats. They still couldn't somehow get it out of committee. Well, this year, when NATO was coming to Washington to have their meeting, suddenly Bill 676, they just took out all that wording and put in new wording to say that NATO must always be fully funded. It had 40 minutes of debate. Not only got out of committee like that, went right to the floor and was passed 357 to 22. And every single one of, even those who you have great hopes on and have said gutsy things, and I'm all for, putting it out when they say good things, but even Ilhan Omar and Ocasio and others, they all voted for NATO. Now, we should rename NATO, by the way. Nuclear Armed Terrorist Organization. That's what NATO stands for. But it is what makes any real debate or discussion. That doesn't mean you wouldn't support full medical care for everyone and look for some avenue to do so. But just know what we're up against, and it's from both political parties. And it's the way they run things. And there's no democracy in it. Doesn't mean I'm not always feeling strongly about people's movements, but let's have a realistic expectation.
So what will we do instead, sir?
Well, I'm sorry.
That's a bigger question, and that's a lot of...
And we have other people who are waiting. Thank you. The two gentlemen, the gentleman with the red cap and the yeah, this gentleman and the lady behind. Yes, him, and then
there's a woman up front here as well.
Okay, first row.
Hi everybody. My name is Haiphong. I am a Secretary General of Pakistan US Freedom Forum and the founder member of the May First Coalition for Immigrant and Workers' Rights. It's going to have the meeting tomorrow in the Solidarity Center. Thank you very much for your visit to Venezuela. One thing we must clear in our mind, that when you're on the road, raising your hand, raising your fist, it affects somewhere. It affects somewhere. It's not going anywhere. It's still in this world, it's going to affect those people whose occupiers are the backers of the occupiers. Who want to intervene in other countries, they are the member of the United Nations Chapter. Venezuela is sovereignty of the Venezuela is protected by the United Nations Charter, and we are doing whatever we're doing and whatever we've done to follow the United Nations Charter and the General Assembly resolution. And we are proud of you from this country to raise the voice of the conscious. I want to salute all of you, and I want to wish all the best being the Pakistani community, from the Pakistani community, our full support to every country who's fighting for their sovereignty. It doesn't mean that we are the pocket of any country's dictator or the family ruler in Saudi Arabia, but we love that it's a job of the Venezuelan, it's a job of the Syrian, it's a job of the Kashmiris to decide what they want. So thank you very much, all of you, and I think that's the message from this evening. Thanks.
Raise your hand, Nellie. Nellie, raise your hand so he knows I mean you. Okay.
Hi, my name is Nellie Bailey. I host Propaganda Radio with Glencore, and for 10 years. Our good friend Bruce Dixon is going through another stage of his illness, and I hope that all of you here who love Propaganda Report support it, and Bruce will send out your best wishes and prayers and thoughts to him and his recovery. So thank you. I wanted to say that first. My question is about the propaganda of the U.S. government that, and this is the big lie, that in fact the Maduro government is responsible for food and medication not being received by the people. We obviously know that that's a lie. But Willie, can you and others talk more about how the Venezuelan government, the Bolivarian Revolution, is going beyond the sanctions and behind the sanctions, and these new financial arrangements that are being made from barter, but not having to use the U.S. dollar, the petrodollar that dominates the global economy. So that's my first question. And my second question is really to Danny about his book, U.S. Exceptionalism. So we know that the U.S. government's position is we're going to make the economy steam. We're going to bring every brutal pressure there is against the Venezuelan people, and included, and that's not working, as Sara and others have pointed out, not what they wanted. So U.S. troops are being amassed in Colombia. And so can you sort of play that out in terms of a possible scenario with respect to U.S. exceptionalism and reclaiming Latin America as its backyard? What that might mean, or portends for war, or whoever wants to answer that.
Okay. Can we take one more question? I was told there was somebody up here. And right there, right in front of you. Okay. And then we'll answer this three. Thanks.
Thanks so much for the great panel. It was really incredible. I hope the best for your book launch and everything. I love to read the book. I was just wanting to ask, as somebody who's been sort of anti-imperialist, anti-war activist for a minute, I can't help but notice how different this is. Just the fight back and the resistance in the streets, but also like in the media regarding Venezuela as opposed to Syria. So Syria, it was sort of like, a real slog, and I think it was awesome that we had so many people in the streets for the 23rd. I don't know if we would have ever had that many people out in the streets for Syria. I know that everyone on the panel has been in solidarity with Syria as what it's been going under. So I was just wondering if the panel could speculate or explain maybe what is different about Venezuela this time. Is it because the material conditions have changed? Is it because the media has changed? Is it because people have gotten smart to the lies? Is it because people are tired of these, false revolutions or what have you after the Arab Spring? I'm just wondering if folks here could maybe enlighten us a little bit as to what you think maybe the difference is. Thank you.
All right, panelists, who wants to take those questions?
Should we start with the first
there's a
one?
mic. Oh, you have it. Okay, cool. There was a question.
So do you want to start right now?
Thank you.
Okay, it's yeah, the sanctions have, we can see the effect in Venezuela, but what the government is doing to fight those sanctions. First, the alliance that was formed by President Chavez with Russia and China has been very effective. For example, China is buying now 200% more oil from Venezuela. Since Venezuela is not selling a single drop of oil to the United States right now. So China is buying most of the oil right now. But not only that, Venezuela is opening soon, next coming year, a refinery in China. And they will create a gas station similar to Cisco in China. So they will have to start 10,000 gas stations. And that's coming next year. Russia also helping a lot because Russia is an oil exporter country. So yes, they are helping with the oil industry, and they are putting money in the oil industry too. And something very important to say is that during the blackout, the United States was expecting to affect also the oil production, but was not affected at all. Venezuela was producing 1 million, selling 1 million barrels a day, and the production was stable despite all the blackout. And it's because there are a bunch of technicians from Russia helping the Venezuelans in the oil field. Of course, Venezuela is using yuan, and ruble, the currency from Russia and China, and euros, more than dollars really now. And petro, that is the currency, the cryptocurrency, the Venezuelan cryptocurrency, that in the last month is the price of the petrol has been increased. I think that 200-something%. It's a big jump for the petrol in the last month. I think that this is a question of time because also India is very interested in investing in Venezuela. South Africa is also very interested in investing in Venezuela. The monolithic Europe is not so monolithic anymore thanks to Donald Trump craziness. So there are other countries from Europe that are interested to invest in Venezuela. And I really believe that it's a question of time. I believe that this is a question of time that China, India, and also South Africa start to invest in Venezuela. Not in oil, but also in the mining industry. I don't know if you know, Venezuela have a lot of thorium. Thorium is a mineral that is replacing in the future uranium. So in Venezuela have more thorium than uranium and than oil. So Venezuela has 3 times more thorium than oil. So everybody is saying that it's the next step to produce electricity and to also for space travel, to those long travel through the space.
Should we just go down this
Sure.
road?
Okay.
Oh, okay, there was a question on Syria.
Well, you could.
Well, no, there was one about my book before.
Yeah, go ahead,
Okay.
then we'll come back.
So I just want to answer Nellie's question about the book and its relevance to what's happening in Venezuela. So first of all, Ajamu Baraka was also on the forward of the book, and the forward does the afterword, so that sweetens the deal. But in terms of the question, a lot of our book discusses how U.S. exceptionalism as a narrative is in crisis because the system of imperialism that the United States rules over is also in crisis, and Venezuela is a really big example of that crisis. The U.S. right now objectively can't militarily invade Venezuela, and we did talk about the S-300 systems and the dangers that those pose to any U.S. military invasion efforts. However, an empire in crisis, as Glenn Ford says, is a dangerous empire, and just because it can't doesn't necessarily mean it won't. So it's hard to really have a crystal ball about what's going to happen, but in terms of the narrative of American exceptionalism and this idea that the United States should reclaim its quote-unquote black backyard of Latin America, we can guarantee that that's going to be the narrative. But under Trump, I think the United States is really facing a lot of difficulties because he does a lot of things that strip the empire's exceptionalism narrative naked. We have Elliott Abrams recycling old imperialist aims and strategies that were used in El Salvador and Central America in the 1980s, now trying to be reemployed under new conditions. And as you said in your question about Syria and Venezuela, what are these new conditions? Well, part of the new conditions is that people of Latin America have moved forward to the left and have organized and have built societies and organizations that are prepared to meet this challenge. And I think one of the things that we need to remember about American exceptionalism is that it is a myth. However, that myth has taken hold of most of the United States and most of its population. However, conditions around the world are a lot different. So we're going to see that constant struggle play out, and it's playing out right now in the elections. It's playing out with people like Gabbard coming out against regime change, regardless of what her actual record is. I know it's mixed, but we have these scenarios where conditions on the ground are changing, and people in the United States, I think, are getting more and more weary of war. So there's all of these conditions that I think the ruling class is considering, and regardless of what it's preparing for, I think we have an opportunity now as we have this empire in crisis, stagnating. We need to get on board with efforts like the Black Alliance for Peace is waging and begin to organize this struggle on the ground to really debunk the myth of American exceptionalism, but also to fight the policies and the practices and the conditions that narrative justifies.
Did you have something to say? No, you didn't?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
This is speculation. A lot of things are different from now and the U.S. war on Syria. A big thing is there had been decades of demonization of Muslim people and a real hostility that's so ingrained. This is the impact of the media. So almost any lie that's told when people know very, very little is hard to cut through, hard to build solidarity. It's also true it was a war that began under the Obama administration, Democratic Party, and that silences a lot of voices. Humanitarian war, humanitarian intervention. Remember, it was a humanitarian bombing against Libya too. And Libya, 7 months of bombing, absolutely destroyed the most modern, advanced, highest standard of living country in Africa, along with assassinating the president. So Syria, they had exactly the same plan. They didn't think it would last 6 weeks. And it is pretty amazing that Syria survived. And it's a lesson for the whole world that the U.S. doesn't always win. But I think another thing that Venezuela has going for it is there are a lot more people in the U.S. who read and understand Spanish than there are who read and understand Arabic. That's just a fact. So there's both the demonization of all Arab people, that's a fact, but there's also more access to information. There's a very large Latino population in the U.S. And so there's a great deal more sympathy and feeling for Venezuela. I think all these things together, it's Trump making the war, so this is certainly a less popular, absolutely hated administration, and that has an effect. But it is still a struggle. Can we get ahead of this? Can we get ahead of it before there's another step and another step? And I think we owe that to the people of Venezuela, because it's not a given. The movement now is doing more than on Syria, but not nearly enough. So we got to step it up.
And very quickly, I would just echo Sarah's comments that one of the most important and critical difference between the war in Syria and today is, in fact, Obama. But secondly, it's also, I think, reflective of the motion among the anti-war, anti-imperialist forces here in this country, that there's been an uptick in activity, uptick in organizing. There's been a sense of urgency that was translated into the efforts of February 23rd and the efforts last year of building a new coalition to close down U.S. and NATO bases, efforts to go back to the people to try to revive the anti-war movement here in this country. And we've seen some progress as a consequence. But we have a lot of work to do. As Sara also reminded us, even among the so-called progressives, there's confusion and reaction when they would vote for something like funding NATO. That's backward. That has to be dealt with. These folks have to be called out. The support they have given to preventing the extraction of U.S. troops from Crier. Most of the progressives supported that action also to prevent Trump from taking troops out of Crier. And we've got to remind people constantly also too of the ongoing horror of Yemen. Another one of Obama's wars. So we have a lot of work to do. And that's why I think, again, it's so critically important for us to take advantage of this increased consciousness among people, take advantage of the hatred people have of Trump, and really make this issue of war and militarism a central component of the national discourse here in 2020.
All right, where are you guys going? Hello, where are you guys going to put this? You put it right here.
I have an
When's your
announcement. We have a very special dessert for our guests and for you. I want you to know that even brownies want the U.S. to get out of Venezuela. I want our speakers to see this.
Oh my God! Let me take a picture of that. Hands off Venezuela.
Wait, hold on. Okay, hold on.
That's so artistic.
We'll turn it around.
All right. So okay. Oh, wait. All right.
Folks, I have one question.
Hold on.
Okay,
Put
so
the cake over there,
now
or the
that
brownies.
now that the guests
That sort of breaks up the conversation.
So good. Things so simple.
I want to eat all
so,
of Venezuela.
I know. How imperialistic you
Hello. Hi, everybody. Hello. Thank you so much for the brownies, but we're not quite finished yet. But this is a sign that we are almost done.
Okay.
So you have a quick question.
Very quick.
All right.
All right. My question is this. This weekend, myself and another veteran Panther went to a conference in Maryland. On the way there, we stopped at a gas station, and we saw a tanker, a white tanker with green print across it that said Venezuela. And we asked the driver, was this related to Sitco? Did they take it over or whatever? And he said he didn't know. He was just delivering it. They weren't downloading the gas or the oil. But my question is, did anybody take over Sitco that you know of with that description, with the green print Venezuela, of course? Does anybody know anything about that?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, do you have a mic there? There it is.
Oh, yeah. I didn't see that.
No, the executives right now, the executives of Citgo, all of them have been appointed by Guaido. But the other thing is that some of those executives are connected with this professor from Yale University. His name is Ricardo Haiphong. Are related with this guy that is the man, the mastermind of the neoliberal measures that were took during the Caracazo when thousands of people were killed. So this is the kind of people that now are running Cisco. And they also request they are lending around $2 billion to be able to run Cisco because Venezuela is not putting anything there. So they lend $2 billion, 1.8 billion to run Cisco because they don't have the oil. So they're getting the oil from Mexico right now. And yes, it's something else. It's not Venezuela.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to have to wrap up. We are at the witching hour. It's 9 o'clock. It's not one at all. Nope.
Here, take this one.
Okay.
Yes, thank you all for coming, and I want to give it to our guests. They're very
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. We're going to wrap up now. We're not ready now. So if you have a question for a panelist, you can still speak to them. Thank you, Sheila. Sheila Havnaka, our organizer. And Greg Russell. Thank you, Russell. There it is. Thank you all so much, and good evening. Thank you so much for coming.
follow us.